Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. We return again to Frank B. Robinson's Psychiana series. We are now on Lesson 8. Once again, you do not have to listen to these in order, but there is some advantages to doing it if you want to. Each one is unveiling, sort of like an onion, of the law, and that's just what he refers to it as, the law, and an explanation of the cosmic forces around us and how our thoughts create reality from a different point of view, a different writing style that sort of creates a sense of excitement with each unveiling in each lesson. This one, we talk about allegorical illustrations and stories that we hear from myths and the actual importance of what they mean behind it, the principles behind it. Advanced Course Number 1, Lesson 8. Dear friend and student, I'm sending you the 8th lesson. It is very important that you study it with the fundamentals in mind, as the allegorical illustrations are only for the purpose of bringing out the points involved. Literally, the stories are merely allegories, but the principle behind them is scientifically true, and it is for this reason that I have used them in this connection. Read and study this lesson until you are sure that it is clear, as it is very important. Be faithful in your exercises, and do not fail to memorize the little poem at the end of this lesson. Sincerely, your friend, Frank B. Robinson. In your last lesson, I told you a few things which were quite new to you probably, and I think I opened up a realm of thought to you which is fraught with very vast possibilities, to say the least. You will remember that the picture was as follows. We saw first the initial creation of the universe from the vast nebula, probably through explosion or from some other cause. A sun was formed, as they still are being formed in the heavens. Then we saw the earth and its planets as a throw-off from the sun. All this, of course, was millions and billions of years ago, as far as our own individual earth is concerned. But this same process is still being repeated now in the formation of other planets similar to our own. You will, of course, realize that this is an immense scheme and must be governed by some marvelous creative law. We saw that no personality as such ever had anything to do with it, nor indeed can ever have anything to do with it. We saw that no God as such could ever be responsible for it if one looks upon such God as an anthropomorphous being of any sort. We saw further that it was a spiritual law, which is in operation in the staggering system of creation. And we saw further that the unseen or spiritual realm is the real and the permanent realm from which all material things must first come. The Bible paragrapher was quite correct when he stated, "For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen or unseen are eternal." And here, in this course of study, we are dealing with unseen things. Therefore, they are eternal things. They are spiritual things. Almost every scientist of note is quite fully agreed that behind the physical and material universe, there moves a great unseen force. More and more are men coming to realize that the material matters very little, but the spiritual matters very much. Certain it is that there can be no material thing at all unless such material thing first had its inception and its conception in the unseen realm. It must have been created, or its creation directed by the great unseen forces the scientists of today are talking about. Then you will remember we saw actual evidence of such an unseen force in the famous cosmic ray made famous by Dr. Millikan. This ray opens up a vast realm, and it is my opinion that in the realm of this ray lies the answer to the riddle of the universe. At any rate, if it does nothing else, this ray absolutely proves the existence of some unseen force or other, and it is quite reasonable to suppose that as we discover more of these famous rays, we shall also know much more about their nature. Today, however, we know that they exist. There is no chance for argument there, and we know that their discovery is quite recent. We know something else also. We know that a field of immense magnitude has opened up through the discovery of this ray. In the last analysis, my friend, and when the last thing about the spiritual realm is known, we shall discover that everything that today is deemed supernatural will be found to be quite beautifully natural. You know, the Bible has a story in it. There were large walls built around the city of Jericho. We are told that at a certain signal, a blast of a trumpet, these walls fell down, killing the enemy. The reason the walls fell down at the blast of the trumpet is because God, in some supernatural manner or other, caused them to fall. It was looked upon as a divine intervention, and the walls, we are told, fell miraculously through the miraculous blast of a miraculous trumpet. But recent investigation and excavation in the ruins of Jericho have told us an entirely different story. These excavations show us that these walls had been carefully undermined and propped up with heavy stakes. At the signal of the trumpet, human hands knocked the props from under the walls and they fell. This is the reasonable and proper explanation of it. And behind every true supernatural story, no matter how wonderful it may be, there lies a perfectly natural answer, for there is nothing supernatural in the universe. Many things, of course, seem to appear supernatural to us. That is only because we do not understand the law involved, and to us, I suppose, they are supernatural. Those of us who are experimenting and delving into the unseen or spiritual realm, though, know there is nothing of the supernatural connected with it at all. It's all on account of our own lack of understanding of that realm. And when Earth's last picture is painted, and when the full knowledge of spiritual or natural law breaks on the earth, the glory of it and the beauty of it will be indescribable. It staggers the imagination of some of us now, but then you see that it is quite reasonable, for we see the import and the amazing glories of the day in which spiritual law or natural law, which is the same thing, will be fully understood. Truly the lion shall lie down with the lamb. Truly a child shall lead them. Truly the glory of the knowledge of the Lord shall cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. Not, of course, the old murdering church god Yahweh, who struck dead at one lick over 50,000 men, women, and children. No, not that human-made man god at all. But people will then realize how utterly foolish such conceptions of deity are and ever have been. And then in that day, and in the place of the old pagan philosophies we have today, there will break on the world the knowledge of the existence of the creative life spirit as it actually exists. Then will the law of God, or the law of the spirit realm, or in other words, the law of the natural realm, be all supreme. For listen to me, my friend, the solution to this whole problem, including life and death, lies in absolutely natural law, and there are those in existence who are drawing mighty close to the solution. Someday soon it will break, and the majesty and simplicity of it will cause every knee to know how to master intelligence, the master God law, responsible for it all. Then shall we know we are known. Then will material things be the least of our troubles, for they will be quite secondary to the things of life. And how our present pettifogging ideas will fade into nothingness when we realize the vast, the almost incredible majesty of the God law. We have been told by those professing to be agents of God on the earth that the finite cannot grasp the infinite. No. Well, the finite can grasp the infinite. The finite is grasping the infinite. And it is grasping it simply because the finite is part of the infinite. That's why. And no matter who you may be studying this lesson, you may depend upon it that you have at your disposal now every single bit of power that exists in the realm of the God law, because you are part of that law. You see that, don't you? Never let anyone tell you that you have to die and go to heaven before you can ever know God. If you ever die and don't know this God law here, then the chances are many to one that you will never know it. But the culmination of it all lies in the fact of eternal life here and now, not in the future. Is this too revolutionary? Well, it's not quite revolutionary enough. At any rate, it is the way all scientific and psychological and spiritual research is pointing. And whether you believe it or not, the God law will manifest itself that way, and will be the highest manifestation of it the world has ever known. And I shall not go on record as saying that this will not be in your day and mine. I do not know with certainty, but I do know that it will be. This is the logical sequence of life. This marvelous existence was never meant to be cut short, and this marvelous body was never meant to be reduced to ashes by death. It's too beautiful a construction for that. It's too high a manifestation of the God law for that. It should not be. Someone here will say, oh yes, that's a nice theory, all right. But to date, everyone has died. No question about that. But that is no reason for premising that all shall always die. Certainly not. 20 years ago, there was no diphtheria serum either, and diphtheria meant death. But it does not mean death today. It means life. 20 years ago, it was not possible for me to sit in my study and hear the fire engines racing down Broadway, but I can do that today. 20 years ago, nothing was known much of the power of so-called mind over matter. But much of it is known today. Not many years since the cosmic ray was discovered, but it is now known. So you will have to be a smarter man or woman than I think you are before you say definitely that it cannot be. You have a perfect right to say that it has not been today, and of course I shall agree with you. But you have no right to say that it can never be, for if eternal life is not the one thing promised through every system of religion the world has ever seen, then I know nothing about these systems. It has always been promised, and beside there is no other logical conclusion to which we can come other than that. There's no other answer to the problem of life. The religionists have told us, of course, that the end of all things is to be eternal life, but they have added a proviso. They have told us that only those shall enjoy this eternal life who believe as they teach and obtain their salvation, their own peculiar way, and in accordance with their system of theology. But I differ from them. There's no evidence that this is a fact. It's pure guesswork. Never has there been the slightest scintilla of evidence on which to base such claims, and yet every system of supernaturally revealed religion the world has ever seen, and it has seen lots of them, has taught that theory, and they have taught it absolutely without authority of any kind or sort. Of course, they all have their divine books, and always these books contain a divine revelation from God to some prophet or other, but when you try to run down the evidence that the story might be true, you just simply cannot do it, that's all. For there is no evidence outside of the internal evidence of these differing religious structures that their stories are true. And that sort of pseudo-evidence is not real evidence at all. No, supernaturally revealed religion has had a long time in which to prove its theories. But they still remain unproven, and yet millions still follow them. Not so many millions in America, for I doubt very much whether there can be found 500,000 intelligent believers in supernatural religion, which believers have examined the foundation of their structure and are satisfied that the foundation is reasonably sound. I know it is not sound. I know that there never has existed any historical proof of the truth of any supernaturally revealed God the world has ever seen, and has seen lots of them. This applies to the Christian religion also. There are many people who think that the only man who ever appeared on earth who was called a combination God and man was Jesus Christ. This is not correct by any means. He was the last one. The church doesn't tell us about the rest of them. It would be just too bad if it did. I think it might be interesting, however, to tell you the names of a few of the world's crucified Christs. And I know of no better book to quote than the wonderful volume written by Kirsty Graves, copyrighted and published by the Truth Seeker Company. I suggest that my students buy that book. It's one of the most learned things ever written. So I quote the names of these crucified saviors from this wonderful book. Krishna of India was supernaturally born and crucified in 1200 BC. Psychiana, the Hindu god, was crucified in 600 BC. Thammuz of Syria was crucified in 1160 BC. Witoba was crucified in 552 BC. Iao was crucified in 622 BC. Jesus of the Celtic Druids was crucified in 834 BC. Quetzalcoatl of Mexico was crucified in 587 BC. Quirinius of Rome was crucified in 506 BC. Indra of Tibet was crucified in 725 BC. Alcestis was crucified in 600 BC. Atis of Phrygia was crucified in 1170 BC. Crite of the Chaldeans was crucified in 1200 BC. Bali of Orissa was crucified in 725 BC. Mithra of Persia was crucified in 600 BC. I do not mention these names to get into any religious controversy at all. I have lots of it now, but I do mention them in proof of my statement that Christ was not the only world savior to be crucified. He was the most recent. All these other fellows were supernaturally born, combinations of God and man, and they all came to save the world. And they all got crucified too. These names and facts are very carefully concealed by those teaching supernaturally revealed religion, though, and I think it just as well that my students know the facts as they exist. It is interesting to note that history discloses the fact of the crucifixions of all these supposed world saviors, but it does not record the crucifixion of Christ. That is mighty significant. Neither does it record his supernatural birth, nor does it mention his life. It knows nothing of the crucifixion, nor the resurrection, nor the ascension, nor the falling stars, nor the dead people climbing out of their graves. History is silent on this whole Christ story, and it has never been explained to me by any theologian why that should be. To me, it just simply means that these marvelous things did not happen. But let us get back again. I said to you that supernatural revelation had lots of chance to prove its claims. And I say here that it has utterly failed to do so. The answer to the problem does not lie in the supernatural realm at all. It lies in the natural realm, if ever it is to be found anywhere. And we are fast finding that out too. At this point, I'm going to go into one of the supernaturally revealed stories and show you how, although but allegory, the basic fundamental idea behind the story might very well be true. And may I ask you to please follow me very closely, for it ties in with the rest of these lessons in a very remarkable manner. Also, it corroborates very clearly the message of life I am giving to you. I'm not quoting from this Bible story because I believe it to be true, for I know that it is not true as written. I know that the master intelligence which created this earth, yon nebula, yon planets with their satellites, did not engage in a conversation with a talking snake. I know that is not a fact. I know further that it is not a fact that this great life spirit made a mistake when he created man, first pronouncing the word good and then discovering his mistake, pronounced, if very wicked, and drowning them all out in a terrible flood. I know that did not happen. Spiritual or God law does not operate that way. However, the Bible says it does, so either the Bible or I am wrong. I leave it to my students to be the judge. We shall look into the story, however, for it's worthwhile analyzing, and it gives perhaps the spiritual cause for man's fall, if he ever had a fall. Personally, I don't believe he did. I believe it has been one continuous and incessant climb from the lower to the higher. We know positively that man is a product of evolution, and we know that he has never retrogressed. This Bible story, however, deals with the changes in manifestation from the spiritual to the physical, so I want to look into it at some length. Later on in the series of lessons, I shall give you the scientific understanding of it, and it will be far more interesting and far more true. There is an element of truth in this Bible story, however, and I particularly want my students to be familiar with this phase of it. It bears heavily on your intelligent understanding of the spiritual God law, and while it may seem a little out of place perhaps to study any part of the Bible here, yet later you will see the wisdom of my doing so. Here it is, and remember, we are now dealing with the creation and fall of man. The creation of man is not so important, but the fall is very important. Once we find opinions differing as to how man was actually created, the story is given us by Moses was that God made man from the dust of the ground. That statement to the scientist and trained psychologist is probably literally correct. but not in the way it is interpreted by those who believe in the word-for-word interpretation of this story of the creation as Moses gave it to us. I shall not take time here to enter into a scientific discussion of this question, as it is far too deep for this sort of work. Those who believe the Moses story verbatim will probably fail to see what I mean when I state that the story is scientifically correct. But it is, so we shall let it go at that. We have seen so far that God is spirit, and there is no record to date of anyone having seen God as such. Not even Jesus ever saw the living God. Furthermore, the scriptures teach that no man hath seen God at any time. Moses stated that God formed man out of the dust of the ground, but God being spirit, we cannot believe that he with physical hands molded and shaped the dust or earth into the shape of a physical man, and then, when the man was made in earth, breathed into his nose the breath of life. From what we have learned so far of what God essentially is, that would have been a physical impossibility. And besides, we shall see a little later that God does not create things in that manner. So it seems that we must look for another explanation of the creation of man, other than the one given us by Moses, as far as the creation of woman goes. I personally cannot accept that either. Moses says that God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and when fast asleep took a rib from his side and made a woman. It would have been far more simple for God to have both made man and woman out of dust at the same time than for him to have performed such a delicate operation as removing a rib and then transforming the rib into a woman. However, probably the whole story of creation as Moses wrote it was only according to the wisdom of his day, and we shall not spend any more time discussing it, especially when we have a subject of far greater importance to discuss in this lesson. We are told that after God had finished his creation of man and woman, he planted a garden and placed both the man and woman in it to care for it. Now please remember, at this point there was not another human soul on this earth but this couple. Then we are told God gave to this couple certain things to do, telling them just what they could do and just what they could not do. From here on, I shall ask you to follow me very closely, please, for to grasp the following truths fully gives one a grasp on this so-called fall of man that he has never had before. Here they were, the man and the woman, fresh from the hand of the living God, and both in each other's presence, naked and not knowing it. Now I ask you to try to conceive of what sort of being man and woman would be to be both together and naked, and not be able to comprehend the fact that they were naked, for it was not till later that they knew they were naked. Spend a little time in thought and try to imagine a couple so constituted that the presence of each other in a naked condition had no effect upon them at all. In fact, they did not know themselves that they were naked. Now listen a moment. Please, I want you to ask a question here. Suppose for a moment that you and I were of such mentality, that we could be placed in the same position as this first created couple were, and no thought of the physical ever enter our minds. We could be a pretty spiritually minded couple, would we not? The fact of the matter is, however, that the first created couple, as this mighty life spirit made them, had no sense of the physical at all. They could not see the physical, for they had been able to see each other as fleshly bodies. They would have known that they were unclothed, but they knew it not. I am of the opinion here they were purely spiritual creations, having no such thing as a physical body at all. Either that, or they possessed a physical body and were not conscious of it, which means the same thing. I am of the further opinion that this part of the creation of man is identical to the part of the creation of the universe, up to the time God called it into existence by word of mouth. We have very plainly seen that the initial creation of the earth was a mental creation. I believe the story of the creation of man up to this point to be similar creation, could not have been any other kind. Now, we shall see what happened to cause man to become a physical being, and what caused that event to take place. What a pity it is that the event ever took place, but it did. There's no denying that fact. The next step in the story of man's creation, for you must remember that he is not yet in the form in which we have him today, runs about as follows. This first created man and woman had been told by this mighty life spirit which had created them that there were certain things which they must not do. Whether it was a literal apple tree or a little gooseberry bush does not enter into the discussion at all. It makes no difference whether it was such or whether it was not. The fact of prime importance here is the fact that God told this man and this woman that if they did certain things, inevitable death would follow. That is the prime factor just here. And in passing, let me call the students' attention to the fact that instead of the opening of the eyes of the man and woman bringing life to them, it brought death. Now note carefully, this death is what we called life today. And then we are told God left them alone. We are to presume here that both the man and the woman believed God when he informed them that they would die if they did a certain thing, disobeyed him. At this point, there comes into the picture a sinister figure, a figure that is responsible for the entire suffering of the human race to date. Moses says a serpent entered the garden. It makes no difference whether it was a snake or a porcupine that actually entered this garden where those two created beings of God were. The whole picture is entirely illustrative. This snake, or whatever it might have been, speaking physically, went to the man and woman and asked them if it were a fact that God had told them that they would die if they did a certain thing. It makes no difference if that thing were the eating of an apple or anything else. Remember that. The actual act is beside the point. On being told that it was a fact that God had so informed this man and woman, this snake, or something it represents, said unto the couple in effect, did God say that you would die? Well, that isn't so. Don't worry about that. You won't die. Now, beloved student, hear me. Had that man and that woman then and there have said to the snake, oh yes, we will die, God said so, I should not be here writing this to you, and neither would you be in your room reading it. Neither would there be a single solitary thing in the entire universe contrary to the great immutable God, not excepting the earth itself, for this entire world as we have it today is in itself contrary to and opposed to the great spiritual God. Had there been no disobedience on the part of that first couple, there would be nothing physical in the entire creation. Remember that. This man and woman taking that stand, how different it all would have been. But they didn't. And right here is the actual deed that brought upon this earth all the misery, poverty, sickness, and death it has ever seen. And the fact or deed which caused it all was the fact that the man and woman believed the snake in preference to believing God. Do you see that? Not only do they choose to believe the serpent, or what it represents, but they deliberately showed their disbelief in the spoken words of God by actually doing the very thing that God had commanded them not to do. In other words, they showed this mighty spirit they had created them. They would rather obey someone else than him. Now listen to what happened, and listen well. The moment they deliberately chose to obey the snake rather than God, and the moment they actually disobeyed God, their eyes were opened, and they knew they were naked. If their eyes at this point were opened, then it must follow that there had been closed up at this point. Now just what effect did the opening of their eyes have on them? Only one effect, and that terrible in its consequences. It gave them the consciousness of physical existence, which up to that point had never been known. So you see, prior to the disobedience of God, there was no such a thing as physical consciousness that came when man's eyes were opened. And I shall state in passing here that when the same eyes are closed that were opened in the garden, then and only then can man be what he was before the fall. This Jesus came to do, as we shall see later. What happened from that time on is more or less history, and we shall not concern ourselves with it here. The purpose of this lesson is to show you the mighty significance of the fact of the fall of man, so that you may intelligently understand it and understand the things that are to be told you further along in your studies. What a simple thing it seems to listen to this story of the fall of man, and yet what vital truths are herein contained. By this time you are beginning to grasp the truth as it has been presented to you, and as you slowly but surely grasp it, you will most assuredly see this earth and everything connected with it is the result of unbelief. You will also begin to grasp the truth that whatsoever we have on this earth is only secondary to things as they really are. The real things are the unseen things. The things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are unseen are eternal. Another thing you can see is the fact that if the opening of the eyes of man to physical things closed his eyes to spiritual things, or in other words, to things as they are, then as long as we are physical, our eyes will still be closed to the real or the spiritual things. This you will see is the spiritual interpretation I put on the Bible story of the creation and fall of man. It is a wonderful allegory, but truth is oft times veiled in myth and allegory, and you will do well to carry this picture in your mind, for it is in a way correct. It will help you later, though, when I give you the true and scientific explanation of the whole matter. Now, your exercises for the next 2 weeks are to be the very same as they have been. You are to keep constantly before you and in your thoughts the things you want to manifest in your life. As we progress, you will see the principle involved, and finally, the whole question will open up like a rose, and you will see the reason for what you are doing now. You are now releasing your desires into the vast cosmic or God realm. And let me say to you that such desires reaching the cosmic God are always realized. Think over that for a moment. They are always realized. That is the law or the cosmic realm. That is the law of the great life spirit. That is the law of God. That is God. The more earnestness you put into your thoughts and desires and affirmations, the faster will you progress towards your goal. And don't forget that while these exercises may seem simple, they are far from that. For they are spiritual or unseen exercises dealing with spiritual or unseen things. And remember, the spiritual realm is the realm from hence all physical manifestations come. I shall leave you here for 2 weeks. Be earnest. Be insistent. Be constant. Drive the thoughts into the cosmic or God reservoir. That what you want to be is on its way to you now. And it won't be long after the God law has begun to operate until you know what is happening. Cordially, your friend Frank B. Robinson. Special for this lesson, in addition to continuing the exercises as given in the previous lessons, I want you to thoroughly memorize this little verse during the next 2 weeks. Invictus. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishment the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. W. E. Henley. Examination questions for lesson number 8. These examination questions are for your benefit, and you should know the answers to them all. If they are not clear to you, read your lesson again and again until they are clear. 1. Scientists are now nearly all agreed that behind the physical and material universe there moves a great unseen force. Have we any actual evidence of such an unseen force? 2. Where must the inception of every physical or material thing be sought? 3. Compare the Bible story of the fall of Jericho with the facts as disclosed by recent investigations and excavations. 4. That something has never occurred to date is no ground for asserting that it can never occur. 5. In what connection was the above statement made? 6. Does history record the crucifixion of any alleged world saviors? How many? 7. Does history record the crucifixion of Christ? 8. Does history record any of the marvelous occurrences relating to Christ that are related in the Bible? 9. Between what years are crucifixions of 14 alleged world saviors recorded by history? 10. The Bible story of the fall of man is susceptible of a spiritual interpretation. Can you give it? 11. If the opening of the eyes of man to physical things closed his eyes to spiritual things, what conclusion must be drawn with reference to our present condition? 12. Can you repeat any of the stanzas of Henley's poem entitled Invictus? And that is lesson 8. It's interesting, Frank B. Robinson is a little more aggressive about talking about some of the myths related to certain religions, and is very aggressive about talking about the fallacies behind some of the Christian tenets in the Bible. I love the interpretation of the Adam and Eve story. We've talked about it on several occasions, and I have an episode dedicated to it. It's a very powerful spiritual story, and I do believe he's right. They're saying that before they became physical, they weren't even physical entities at the time until she ate the apple and became physicalized. So I find that very interesting. I really enjoy how he points out that we've seen some of the myths that we see in religion about the crucifixion in other stories. Check out Neville Goddard's interpretation of the crucifixion as being the way that the soul entered the body of man when it first took up this experiment, coming in through the hands, through the rib, through the feet. It's an interesting perspective, and very much of what he's saying is still consistent with the Neville Goddard idea that the Bible itself is a spiritual book, and it's talking about spiritual history. It has nothing to do with actual history. But this God force, this God law, the way he writes about it, and the potentials that are available to it is very real. And if you're following these lessons, then it's starting to really come into actuality for you. Continue to bring up your desires, continue to imagine them, continue to use the last affirmations that he discusses in the previous lessons. I am successful. Think of it feelingly. Know that you're contacting and connecting with something outside of yourself, even if it is within yourself. Find that separation, connect and identify to it. His exercises for finding that bright spot while you're sleeping work. It gives you a place to look for this God power as an individualized source. By doing so, you start to become aware of it, separated from the rest of your reality, and then you can connect to it even more. You can find the God law, go on that path, listen to those early episodes if you haven't listened to them, and you have a sort of week by week way of slowly connecting to this God force, which is super cool to think about. If you go back and read the story of Frank B. Robinson, he had gone through several trials earlier in his life, citizenship questions and things like that, but he always overcame them. And I see in his life, if you read the biography of his life, that he was able to overcome problems and find success by using this law. He's an example of it. Other people can experience this. You are using a law. This law, once you understand it, is much more than you think it is. That's why we can't define it in a single lesson. This law needs to be understood from many different angles, and you slowly understand it over time. There's not a catchphrase like the law of assumption or the law of attraction. It's a law. It's more than just those catchphrases. It's a law, and it's just something you learn about how the universe works. When you connect to it and understand it, then you become it, and you have the power of it. So please check out those previous lessons. Let me know how you've been doing on the current lessons. Have you been trying out the current lessons? Have the affirmations been working? Is there any success stories out there? This is lesson 8, and you may have started to see some success stories. I would love to know. Please put it in the comments. Put a like on this so other people can find out about Psychiana. It's an amazing group of lessons by a very fun teacher to listen to, who was a little bit different than the other New Thought teachers from the time. In any case, you can find all episodes of The Reality Revolution at therealityrevolution.com. Check out my new oral lessons, which are available. You can get a full recording of all of the different talks and mastermind we had at the Reality Con, including live karaoke and some live meditations that were amazing. And you can find that in the links to this episode. And we will definitely have a new Reality Con soon, but that one has the full Aura program, which you can use to actualize whatever reality it is that you want. In any case, all episodes of The Reality Revolution can be found at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.